Hi, it's Laurie and Jennie of AstroPath, and we're here with you today to talk about Virgo season. Before we jump into that topic, I just want to ask that you all subscribe to our channel if you haven't already and follow us. You can find Jennie at hiddenpathastrology.com and you can find me at astrolore.org. You can find us on social media. We're all where everyone else is. So find us and follow us. So Virgo season. What do we want to think about here? The sun is entering Virgo. When is that happening, Jennie?
It's happening August 22nd. On here on the East Coast of the US, it's 11:17 p.m. So it's very late in the day. But that's what's happening. And then we're gonna hopefully I'll feel a little bit of a drop into Virgo season, right?
Yes. Yes. I always think of the shift from Leo season to Virgo season as being one of the most dramatic. Because Leo season is so, being ruled by the sun, it is such a dynamic period of time, and everyone's off trying to quickly get their vacations in before the kids have to go back to school, and everybody's on the beaches having a good time. And we are all looking forward to Virgo season. What do you think of when you think of the end of August and the beginning of Virgo season, Jennie? What comes to your mind?
Oh, it's just time to get back to the simple, practical tasks that we all need to do to keep our lives going. I mean, that's at its simplest, like reorganize our to-do list. Like maybe we're a little bit like, woo, like that was some time off. I'm ready to get back to something with some structure and knowing what I need to do on each day. It's a relief. And it's also more of a inward facing. We're now in a yin sign. We've come from fiery Leo, super outward expression, and now we're going to like settle down and go inward and just re-find ground beneath our feet, kind of reestablish our roots a little bit. It's that time of year. That's what I think of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always think we all throughout our lives, us living in the culture and world that we are in, every year at this time as kids, we went back to school. This is Virgo season, is when our moms would take us to the store to get shoes that fit us for the upcoming year, and all the practical things to make the coming months work. And and then we get our kids off to school and we start getting serious. People really start, like you said, looking inward. It's a time to take up a new study, to start making those to-do lists that you haven't been paying attention to for the past month. So and I always think it's time to make soup.
Yeah, that's right. But it is. And I think that's such a great metaphor for Virgo, because Virgo is so much about practicality, and like, if somebody's hungry, Virgo's like, let's make soup, let's feed people. It's not about sitting around and talking about it. It's about actually rolling up your sleeves and being service oriented and helpful. It has that component too that I really like. And I think both you and I are pretty big fans of Virgo, because it brings in just a much less me focused aspect. And it's much more like, hey, let's start thinking about others and thinking about how we can move these different pieces of our lives forwards, including other people. So.
It's interesting because Virgo has a really bad reputation in a lot of ways. People think of it as being really picky and really critical and all those things you hear about Virgo. And the way I think about it is Virgo can come across that way, very picky and very critical. But it's that whole idea of Virgo has the ability to see potential. And it really wants to reach that potential. And the self-criticism with Virgo comes in when you don't feel like you're reaching that potential. And that's when you sit down and you make the lists and try to get that done. And the reason for wanting to reach that potential is to be of service. It's not for selfish gain. It's to be of service to others. I do love Virgo. It's one of my favorite signs. I think it's a very... it's there's a kindness in Virgo also that I don't think is talked about a lot, but I guess it's part of that wanting to be of service. Is such a kindness in it, and a lack of, I think about, coming on the heels of Leo, which is such a egoic sign, Virgo has such a lack of that. Such a I love Virgo. So I could
I think,
get on a soapbox about Virgo any day.
I was just gonna add, like, I think that it does have that reputation for being self-critical and judgmental and perhaps petty. And I think that that happens when it's really cut off and it's sort of it's isolated and it doesn't want you want to reach out. If you have a lot of Virgo in your chart and you're feeling that way, it's time to reach out and activate the service part of it, because that draws you out of yourself and makes you feel good to you. Oh, I'm contributing. There's a big thing about meaningful contribution with Virgo. So I think that that's an important thing to think about. But it's very meticulous, and it can definitely go in and kind of separate what's important and what isn't. And that's kind of where it gets, I think, some of that bad rap, right? But anyway,
And one other thing I want to say about Virgo before we jump forward is we were talking about it earlier, Jenny, about the fact that Mercury rules Virgo and it rules Gemini, and the difference in that rulership of Gemini and Virgo, that as the ruler of Gemini is a sign that just gathers information. And Virgo is the sign that does something with it, that analyzes it and then finds a useful, meaningful thing to do with it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So it's almost part of a two-step process or something, huh?
It really is. Okay, so let's take a look at the chart of when the sun enters Virgo.
Okay, let's
think about
pull
that
up here. So this is the moment of the sun. You see the sun down here, 0 Virgo. Again, this is for the East Coast, so you need to adjust this chart for your time zone to see where that actually lands. But this is basically what we're seeing on that day. And I don't know. What do we want to say about that?
Well, I think one of the things that we had talked about that I think is just really intriguing, and bear with us here. But one of the things that I find really interesting is during the course of Virgo season, the sun doesn't make very many aspects to the inner planets. It forms a trine aspect to Pluto. It forms a trine aspect to Uranus, and it will form an opposition to Neptune. So during the course of Virgo season, it is aspecting all 3 of the outer planets.
So we just wanted to kind of paint a little picture for you all about what this might mean. We were observing that, Leo season, for those of you who watched our videos, it's pretty complicated. There's a lot going on because of so much happening in fixed signs, which Leo's the fire version of the fixed signs. So much going on that it was a complicated month. And in a lot of ways, this month is quite a bit simpler. And what's happening is instead of all those personal contacts that the sun was making during Leo season, now it's just making contacts to what we think of as like the bigger picture. So now is the time to step back, and as you readjust your priorities, be thinking about the much bigger picture beyond just you and your family, but out to your neighborhoods, your communities, and globally. This is what we're looking at. It really kind of brings in this like more collective focus. So it's like, okay, we've been through some stuff, and now how does that personal story fit into the bigger story, and what is the bigger story? And that's kind of what is being painted, I think, for us.
And we could talk a lot about this, but we want to keep it brief. But I do think it's interesting that there's kind of this flow of the trines to Uranus and Pluto, this empowerment of Pluto, and the wake-up call of Uranus is like the sun, the service-oriented sun in Virgo is really kind of pushing us to open these floodgates to empower the collective somehow. And the opposition to Neptune is a little bit of a warning of what might be hidden in plain view.
Neptune's such an interesting symbol because it really refers to all these different states of consciousness. So that's everything from, hey, I don't want to deal with a thing, so I'm just going to drop into some major delusion and go into take some drugs and just check out from everything. And then at the total other end of the spectrum for Neptune, it's this, oh my gosh, we're all one, we're all living on this planet with these creatures and animals and beings, and we need to kind of realize that there's a oneness to all of us. So, and then it refers to a bunch of different states between those two bookends. So it's kind of like it's up to you in a lot of ways to think about how you want to handle this. Like, do you want to move to more of what we might call a state of enlightenment, of really being aware that we literally are like this little blue marble in this giant vacuum of space, or or to just be like, God, I can't deal, I'm going to escape, I want to practice escapism. And then there's less dramatic ways in between to handle it. Maybe this is a time to up your meditation practice, or be just careful about, do I really need that extra glass of wine? Or just simple things like that can really affect your consciousness and how you feel.
Yeah, there's so many ways that Neptune can play into this story this month. So many ways. But
just I think the simple, maybe the takeaway for everybody here is the simple idea that we are working with earth signs. Uranus is in Taurus, Pluto's in Capricorn, Sun is in Virgo. So we're looking at a grand earth trine. Earth is about practicality. Earth is a yin sign. It's about getting grounded and having a little more stillness. But at the same time, getting things done, like looking at results, like doing things that you can see the results. I mean, that is something that Earth is focused on. And even the opposition to Neptune is the yin water. So we're kind of in this, it's the yin zone this month. It gives you a chance to really reflect inwardly. There's a couple other things happening this month that will also show that. But this is a time to kind of take a step back, get your lists organized, focus inwardly a little bit, calm down, find some grounding. Put your seatbelt on.
Put your seatbelt on. And, on that note, I think the one other thing that we do have to pay attention to here is that the sun does square Mars, and Mars is going to be a big topic going forward. And we will be making a video specifically about Mars at some point before it turns retrograde. It turns retrograde on October 30th, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But it does enter the shadow of the retrograde on September 3rd. So, and as it enters its shadow, it is squaring the sun. The sun and Mars are in a square aspect here. So there is just a lot of need to pay attention to how you are using your Mars. And when we get into the individual impact videos, one of the things we'll be talking about is where to be paying attention to how you are taking action. Mars is the planet of action, of determination. It's in Gemini, so it's really about how you're using your voice, how you're gathering information, the information that you are gathering. So that's going to be a really important area of your life to be thinking about. And you want to start thinking about it on the 3rd when it enters that shadow, because whatever you're talking about, especially if you've got an edge in your voice in that conversation, you're going to be coming back and revisiting those conversations. So you want to really be paying attention to that.
Huge emphasis on how you want to communicate, because Mars is all about mobilizing resources. Like Mars in ancient mythology was the god of war and all that. And what that really refers to is this ability to mobilize an enormous amount of resources to make things happen. And so in Gemini, it's using a voice. It's using a voice to do that. It's using the voice to command all of these forces. And so, and to think about the different ways of being a commander. I mean, there's a really crappy way of, a more fearful way, or there's a way to be more skillful in how you're using your words to inspire and to kind of put the information together so people can understand it and want to make change or do something different.
I love how that utilizing resources, that's so good to think about it that way. And in Gemini, it's utilizing your intellectual resources, the resource of your voice, the resource of the information that you're gathering and understanding. And that square to Neptune at some point, being really careful of what information you are paying attention to.
That's a good caution there. And then the final piece to the month we just want to have put in your brain here is that Mercury is going to retrograde. It's going to go into Libra, and it's actually going to retrograde at 8 degrees of Libra and return to Virgo during Libra season. So for now, we're just going to let you know that it is going to retrograde, and you'll see that on the individual charts as well. But what it does is it just adds a little more of like, yep, focus inward, look inward, because this is the time and a place that you're going to get a chance to revisit old terrain when it retrogrades, and it is the inward view for this month for sure. So
yeah, and it's so interesting because Mercury rules Virgo and Gemini, so that retrograde is really a huge impact.
Yeah,
here. So fascinating. Okay, right. I think we're ready to move into our individual impact statements. Yeah. And I'm going to
I'll stop sharing here.
All right. So now we're going to start talking about the individual impact on each rising sign. So first, here we have Aries rising. And the only thing we've marked on this chart is where the sun is, where Mercury is right now as the Virgo season starts, and where Mars is, because these are the pieces that I really want you all to be thinking about. If you have Aries rising, the Virgo season, Virgo shows up in your 6th house. What does that say about the person and how they're going to interact with Virgo season, Jenny?
Oh my goodness. I think what this is saying for those of you Aries rising, it's pretty straightforward. It's get square with your routines. So these are your healthcare routines, the exercise that you do to keep yourself healthy, your morning walk, or, your morning or your afternoon meditation practice, or any of those things. It also can be like how you eat, like take this time with Virgo to like break it down, like, slow down on the ice cream or whatever but this is a time to think about your food, and just really take advantage. Those of you with Aries rising, I mean, if that's such a fiery energy to be leading your whole chart, this is a time to like settle down and really cool down and settle into those routines so that you can maintain a nice even keel for this month, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing that you want to really be thinking about again is where Mars is on the 3rd of September. Mars goes into its shadow period before it turns retrograde in October. So you're going to really want at the beginning of September here, you're going to want to really start thinking about your communication style, how you're communicating with people, particularly with Mercury going retrograde, and it will be doing its retrograde across this line between the 7th and the 6th house. How you talk specifically with your partners about your daily routines, perhaps. If you're having arguments with your partner about their dietary issues, you want to really pay attention to your communication in relationship, and because what you're putting out here is going to have to be re-examined later in the year.
Yeah. So the more you can be aware of it now, the better off. This is sort of like we're thinking about this month so much of it, like this is your opportunity to kind of go inwards a little more. So that's what I think that's a great suggestion. So really, especially with you Aries rising, you've got to think about your communication. And I love how you said that about it's really pertaining to your partnerships, just because that's where Mercury's going to retrograde. So, and also with Aries rising, wherever Mars is in your chart, that's going to be a very important planet to you. So you're extra sensitive to this Mars. It's such an important planet for you. You're going to be extra sensitive to what this Mars is doing. So,
and just, for your future information, that retrograde of Mars is going to be from the end of October until mid-January. So how you start pushing your energy forward in communication now is going to be revisited during that time. So think about that. Think about that. Prepare for that. That's a lot. This month is about slowing down and preparing for going inward to really give a lot of consideration to how you are communicating and how you are using your physicality, your physical energy, and your communication energy.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I sometimes that third house, like how you move about your daily environment.
Yeah.
So that also can, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that also does add a little more like whatever physical exercise you're doing too, because it is kind of how you move
Yeah.
around. Like it's sort of the house of movement, how you move through your life. So that's going to be a
Mm.
really great way to keep yourself on track, is to make sure you're moving. You're walking, if you're like to bike, or you have some kind of exercise thing you like to do, extra important for both those reasons.
Yeah, for all of the way. Yeah, Virgo
Yeah.
season itself, this is really important. Those daily physical activities are going to be so, so important to you. Okay,
All right.
so now let's move on to those of you with Taurus rising.
Mhm.
Virgo season itself is going to really highlight your fifth house. The fifth house is the area of life where you give of yourself most authentically. And yeah, it's where you give of yourself. The old time astrologers talked about the fifth house as children, love affairs, creativity. It's really where we give unconditionally of ourselves. And with Virgo there's such a kindness and service orientation to how you give of yourself. And
Mhm.
that is really highlighted at this time.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is also going to be if you have any creative projects you're working on, this is a time to get that kind of to-do list organized about how you're going to move that creative project forwards. And it doesn't matter if it's something, whether it's something you're trying to do for work, that's irrelevant. It's any creative project. It might be something you're doing for yourself, but this, I mean, this could be like, your needlepoint thing that you do that's so satisfying, and like just making sure that you commit to doing it a little bit more, because it's going to help bring you a little more grounding and more of that inward facing thing that we're really looking for this month, is this kind of cautionary tale around, hey, take the time to turn inwards and slow down, and get your lists organized and get your schedule structured a bit more. It's really a great opportunity to do that. So
Right, right.
be
Any
part of it.
creative, yeah, any creative project,
Yeah.
whether it be needlepoint or writing,
Hmm.
also with it being Virgo, ruled by Mercury. And okay, speaking of that,
Hmm.
we've got two other planets here that we have put on this graphic that we want to talk about. One is Mars.
Hmm.
Mars is going to be going retrograde, not for quite a while. It goes retrograde at the end of October, and it will be retrograde until the middle of January. We will be doing a video specifically on that. But for now, because on September 3rd, that Mars goes into its shadow period. And what that means is any way you want to really start here at the beginning of September thinking about how you are assertively using your voice in the area of your regarding your resources or your own self-worth. So you want to really be thinking about how you're using your voice there.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is almost, I was thinking, because it pertains to your self-worth, at least part of this is about how are you talking to yourself? How are you, what's
Mm,
that voice in your head? You want it to
mm,
be a supportive voice, that's an encouraging voice. And sometimes we beat up ourselves big time in our heads. We think, God, why didn't I do that? Or why didn't I say this? Or blah, 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 blah. So this is a time to just tune into that if that's happening, and flip the script. Think about like, okay, if you are struggling with that, I know sometimes I struggle with that. Think of, this is a time to use mantra, or
mm.
in our modern talk, it's maybe like affirmations.
Ah.
But this is a good time to kind of get your mind in a better track about how you think about yourself,
How
and
you
that
think
should
about,
help. Yeah.
yeah, about yourself. And also, if you've got a lot of stuff around resources, if you're having conversations about your money issues
Hmm.
and how you talk to yourself about that, whatever it is that is going on that's kind of got that edge, and it's about communication, and it's in that area of resources and self-worth, pay attention. Basically, that's what you need to be doing right now, is paying attention,
Yeah.
because you will be revisiting this conversation in October, November, December. start paying attention now. It will make the process so much easier while the retrograde is going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while Mars is in Gemini, it is ruled by Mercury. The sun in Mercury is also ruled by Mercury. And Mercury is going to go retrograde on, what's the date that it goes retrograde?
It goes
September 9th.
There you go. Thank you. I was like, it's on my
And it
list.
goes, it will go retrograde when it's in Libra, but it's going to do its retrograde across this line. You are going to be really thinking and bringing that, rethinking about not only your creative process, but also the day-to-day routines of how you work with that.
Yeah. So that's a little bit
Same
like, it's gonna, it'll retrograde in Libra and take you back to Virgo. And in your 5th house, I feel like that's going to be really important for you to understand what your priorities are around your creative project.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to give you an opportunity to go back and kind of get in touch with the heart of the project. And then when Mercury moves back forwards into Libra later, you'll have that as the main piece of your priority. So when you set the schedule, you'll know that you need to address that very important sort of heart-centered piece about whatever your creative project is. So it's an opportunity to get your priorities straight for that, I think.
As you're saying that about getting your priorities straight, what came to my mind is something about who you're doing this for. Because when it goes retrograde, it's in Libra, which is all about pleasing everybody else too. And then Virgo is about being of service. So there's something in there about, are you being of service or are you trying to please people? And there's a very big difference there between pleasing someone and being of service. One is you're pleasing people so the light shine back on you. Being of service is just being of service. So I don't know, there's something in there about the priority that you're trying to set there.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good way to think about it. So that should keep you busy, Taurus rising.
Yeah, that should. Absolutely. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on.
Yeah.
And now let's talk about those of you who have Gemini rising. And this puts Virgos in your 4th house. So Virgo season, the sun moves into your 4th house, bringing its light and its warmth into that area. Now the 4th house is really mostly about your home, your family, those deeper levels of family, ancestral line. And this is where you bring your service orientation.
Yeah, I was thinking as you're, laying out like what the 4th house is, it's also your roots. So I was thinking at a simple level, this just means that you are a person whose service-oriented things are very important, rooted part of your personality. Like it's an important aspect to all the things that you're doing. And I think about people, I can think of a few folks with Gemini rising, and a couple of them are teachers. Another one does ADA accessibility in a school. I mean, talk about service and like making it accessible for other people. So these folks are, have that at their core as a core value. So, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So let's see. I got stuck here all of a sudden, Jen.
That's okay. Well, let's the next piece is to talk about Mars, right? Like that Mars is going to be turning retrograde in Gemini in October, and during this month of Virgo, you're going to have an opportunity to very carefully think consciously about everything to do with that action piece in the 1st house, right? Because later on, Mars is going to retrograde and it's going to hang out in your 1st house for a long time. Yeah. So this is a good time to really think about, your self-image, your self-development, your self-awareness. Like how aware are you of you as a Gemini rising person? Gathering information is going to be very important.
And how you use your voice is going to be very important. Yeah, that retrograde happens from the end of October until mid-January. The reason we're talking about it right now is that on September 3rd, it enters its shadow. And, with this retrograde, Mars spends an inordinate amount of time in Gemini. it will be in Gemini until March 25th. So Mars usually spends a pretty, it's pretty quick, it moves through a sign, but it's going to be in there. So this is really bringing this assertive, direct energy right into your first house, which is your personality. So how do you show up? And it's in Gemini. How do you use your voice? And from the time it goes into its shadow on September 3rd, you want to really pay attention, because how you use your voice and how it impacts your family and your loved ones, that is going to come back to be reworked on during the retrograde.
Yeah.
This is connected with Mercury, which goes retrograde on September 9th. When it goes retrograde, it'll be in Libra, and it will retrograde back into Virgo. So it's going to be over this line. We're going to be rethinking how we communicate with our loved ones, with our family members, and using that. The directness of the voice it's really important to be paying attention and thinking about this.
Yeah. And I think, I like how you were mentioning earlier on, Laurie, in our video, the difference between Mercury and Libra and Mercury and Virgo. In Libra, it's more concerned about sort of pleasing other people. And I thought that was a really good way to think about it.
Right.
And when it goes back into Virgo, you can think again about, wait a minute, who am I serving here? Where am I being of service? That's going to be your key question.
Right.
Allow you to reevaluate that and kind of get your priorities into a different spot. And that's what you're going to want to think about during this Virgo period. Yeah,
that difference about from pleasing others to being of service to others. There's a big difference there.
Yeah, it's really great. And the earthness of Virgo is the practicality, getting the hands involved, something you're making or actually doing where there's actually an impact that you can see. I mean, these are some of the things you're going to be thinking about. So
that's it. Pay attention. And now we're going to go on to those of you with Cancer rising. So if you have Cancer rising, the Virgo season, Virgo is in your third house. The sun moves in here for Virgo season, and the warmth and the generosity and the light of the sun goes into your third house. Third house is how you communicate, what you think about on a day-to-day, just your day-to-day thought processes is how I think about that third house. And you can also think of the third house as your interactions with neighbors and the person behind the grocery store counter, just those common interactions. So it's in that area where you want to really slow down, make your lists, think about what you're doing, slow down, and finding ways to be of service in that area.
Yeah. And also another thing is the third house, and because it's Virgo, I mean, this could be, if you're doing any writing projects, this is going to be a time to write. This is going to be a time to get your outline written. And it just, because it's such a communication emphasis here, and that's going to be part of it. Third house also refers to how you learn. So this might be a time that you're having to go back and relearn some lessons that you just need to kind of, get your education back on track. So it's a very cerebral, but could be writing focus as well. So pretty interesting.
And speaking of getting your communication and your understanding of things back on track, let's talk about Mars here for a minute. The reason we're including Mars here is because Mars is going to go retrograde, not for a while. It actually goes retrograde at the end of October and will remain retrograde until middle of January. But the point here is that Mars is going to stay in the house of Gemini for a very long time, until the end of March. I think it's going to be in this house. And on September 3rd, Mars enters the shadow of the retrograde. Anything that's going on that is about this, you're going to be revisiting. So the 12th house is about our unconscious thinking. So where are you beating yourself up? That's the question I would ask with this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about how can you get your mind into a better place? And how do you do that? I mean, I just think about these different spiritual pursuits. I mean, taking the time alone, because the 12th house is the
Yeah.
house of isolation, so that you can have enough
Mm.
time to kind of, I don't know, be square with yourself and be clear on how you want to think about this. The 12th house
Mm.
is also ties in with that whole idea of suffering and how we suffer as human beings in order to learn compassion, these things that
Mhm.
we really need to do. So this is a time to kind of maybe take a little bit more of a kind of intellectual, because Gemini is an air sign, way of looking at it, and take time and space so that you can have quiet, so you have time for that deep internal cerebral reflection. And it's going to be very important. This also underscores back to the idea of writing.
Exactly. That's
Right.
what I was going to
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
This is write down the things that, because I mean, Mars is so action oriented, and the act of writing in that 12th house, which is so hard to describe, is going to be something that's really going to help you bring some balance, give you some space, some perspective, in how you deal with this, right?
Yeah, I,
Yeah.
I love it that you brought it back to that, because that's exactly
Mhm.
what you were saying was making me think about. You had talked about the writing and
Mhm.
communicating, whether it's on paper or not, but yeah, writing, when you're
Mhm.
giving yourself that time alone of the 12th house, and possibly because Mars is going into its shadow,
Mhm.
what you're writing may need to be rewritten.
Yeah.
And
Again and again.
that's anyone who is a writer understands
Yeah.
that the process of writing is the process of editing.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
rewriting is the gift of the writer. Nobody
Yeah.
just sits down and writes.
Yeah.
It's a
I wish.
process of continually going back and rewriting. So understanding that, and with that in mind, we've got both Gemini and Mercury are ruled by Virgo. And Virgo, we've got here on this graphic because Virgo does a little retrograde during Virgo season. It starts its retrograde in Libra, but it goes back and forth over this line. So again, taking time alone at home, working on an intellectual project of some sort
Yeah.
is really
Mhm.
what's up for you.
Yeah, and this Mercury retrograde season that's going to be happening, not season, sorry, just Mercury retrograde, which is happening on September 9th. It's going to station retrograde in Libra. For you with Cancer rising, folks, it's going to be about your attention is going to be drawn back into your family life.
Mhm.
And then you're going to be like, hold on, I got to go back and visit my communication, my
Right.
writing project, whatever it is that this is pertaining to for you, and go back and stick with that for a bit. And then
Yeah.
later on, it'll
Yeah.
come back into Libra. That's later
Right.
on.
Yeah.
But a really important time to just make sure your priorities they're going to shift,
Yeah.
and you want to be paying attention to how they shift, and then, consciously focus that, like consciously work with that energy. So,
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, now those of you with Leo rising, where do we have Virgo here? Here, Virgo season is highlighting your second house. The sun moves into Virgo, it brings its light and its warmth and its generosity in there. Second house is, I'm going to let you talk about second house. We kind of talk about second house a little bit differently, you and I.
yeah, well, the second house, I think at its core, from my perspective, it's really dealing with your self-worth.
Yeah.
But it's really it's to do with your resources. So those are your inner
Yeah.
resources. But it also does do with the much more external financial aspects.
Mhm.
So there's that component in it too. But I can't help but think that it's interesting because Leo rising, such a gregarious sign, and yet Virgo in the second house, I mean, there is a potential for a lot
Mm,
of insecurity here. There's a
yeah.
potential for a nervousness and an anxiety about, oh gosh, am I really good enough? And so I think with
Right.
Leo rising, that's an extra thing to pay attention to. But
Right.
now is the time to go inwards a bit, and recognize your ability to be of service to other people, recognize your worth for just yourself, but in terms of also how you help other people. And that's what you're going to want to kind of tap into, bring you a little more out of yourself during this Virgo season.
For some
What about
reason,
you?
well, for some reason, one of the things I was thinking about as I'm looking at this, and I know I have met with more than one person that I can off the top of my head think about. And this would be an interesting thing to really do a little research about. But Leo rising, you know, you think about that dramatic self-expression, and yet I know people with Leo rising who are real minimalists, which really makes sense when you think about just that Virgo in the second house, that, you know, paring back to what is really important. And that, you know, that second house, I think of it as, yeah, it's money, it's resources, it's stuff, and it's your self-esteem and your self-worth, and how your self-worth is impacted by stuff and resources. So there's a real highlighting that here, you know, maybe with Leo rising, this might be really a time where after Leo season, when you've been in such an expressive period, now it's time to bring all that junk that's, you know, piled up in the hallway and bring it to Goodwill and get rid of it, you know, just really paring down to what's important to you.
I think that's great, Laurie, because as you were speaking, I was like, oh yeah, I can think of a couple Leo rising folks who, you're right, they are minimalists and they really only keep what works. And like, and I do like, so I always think of Virgo as that whole, you know, separating the wheat from the chaff, which is this little act of kind of throwing the wheat in the air so the chaff blows away and only the seeds are left. And I really, that image really came to me strongly as you're talking about that. And that's a really good point. So cool.
Yeah. So that's where the sun is shining. That's where you want to really be paying attention to that area and making your list, getting the stuff out that needs to get out. Yeah. Throwing it up in the air and letting the chaff all blow away. So that's a lot of your job for this month. Now, the other piece we want to talk about is Mars. And the reason we're talking about Mars right now is because we are preparing for Mars retrograde, which doesn't happen for a while. Mars will turn retrograde at the end of October and will remain retrograde until mid-January. On September 3rd, it enters its shadow. So that's why we're talking about it now. We want to start thinking about how we are using Mars in Gemini in the house that it's in. For you with Leo rising, it's in the 11th house. The 11th house, I'll pause and let you talk.
11th house in the simplest terms is groups, but it's community, your alliances, your networks. So you're going to want to be super careful and super tuned in. Just how are you talking to those networks? You know, like, and it's possible you may have some frustrations. If it's a democratic process, it takes time, and Mars doesn't want to. So really good time to notice impatience, to notice frustration. Take a deep breath. And really be clear about how you want to communicate in your groups, because it's because you're going to have a lot of time of Mars going through this area of your life. So now is the time to start tuning in, and having that awareness is just going to bring you to a better place than if you didn't. And then you say something you regret or something that sets you back, and you're just like, gosh, why did I say that? You know? So it's a really important time to tune into that. And just there's a lot of shared resource here, community resource. So you want to make sure that you're able to kind of work with that and not piss anyone off that you didn't mean to, I guess, is the bottom line, right?
Yeah, paying attention to how your message in community or in groups, how your message is being received. Because when Mars goes retrograde, you're going to be revisiting the communications or the frustrations that are beginning now. So the more aware you are of those frustrations and how you're dealing with them, the better off you'll be toward the end of the year when it goes retrograde.
Yeah. And you know, as you're talking to Laurie, it made me realize too, another thing that could happen here is the 11th house is the house of receiving love from your community. And it's possible that you could be so focused on what you want to say that you actually forget to take in the fact that your community is saying, hey, you know, we love you and we want you to do these things. And you're so focused on the thing that you don't take that in. So it's another thing to think about, is to let that come in. which is hard to do with
Right.
Mars there wanting to be all busy and active.
Right.
But if you know, you can do it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. I like that. Okay. And we got to talk about Mercury also. Mercury is going retrograde this month. When it goes retrograde, it's going to be in Libra. So it's going to be in your third house and it will retrograde back across this line. Now, Mercury is going to go retrograde on September 9th.
mhm,
And
mhm.
it's really it's interesting because Mercury rules both Virgo and Gemini. So what it's doing is really important. It's bringing our thoughts, our communications, and our values. Let's see.
Hmm.
We have to really rethink what
Yeah.
our values are and how we're communicating them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like yeah, you got to roll it back a little bit and look at the layer beneath how you're talking, because the layer beneath how you're talking is what your value system is and where you're talking from, so it's really like having to go, wait, hold on, what am I, what's really important to me here? It's that kind of thing with the Mercury retrograde, I
Yeah.
think.
And
Yeah.
it's so tied in. It's so tied in with the upcoming retrograde. And what we were saying earlier about Mercury and Libra being, wanting to please others with our voice, and then Mercury and Virgo wanting to be of service. So there's something in that too, of really paying attention to what your intention is with your voice, with how you're using it.
Oh yeah, that's a great key word there. Intention.
Yeah.
Really important. Nice.
What is your intention? Are you just trying to please people, or are you truly being of service? I think
Yeah.
that's a lot of what that conversation with this retrograde is going to be about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Good enough. Those of you with Leo rising, have a great month. And we're going to move on to those with Virgo rising.
Ta-da. All
Ta-da.
right.
So here we are with Virgo rising, and we're coming into Virgo season. So this brings the sun, the warmth, the generosity of the sun right into your first house. So the sun is shining on you and your personality. Now, how are you going to use that? I guess that's part of the question. How are you going to use that shining sun on your personality and how you express yourself?
Yeah. I guess the first step that popped into my head, Laurie, was just how are you thinking about yourself with Virgo rising? Like, you want to notice if there's some judgment and some of the harder parts of Virgo, right? Like, is there
Mm.
a critical voice in your mind? That's the first thing, because if that's true, then you want to tune into that right away so that you can work with it. Because if you're just doing it without even knowing it and you're not self-aware, it's causing you some damage and you're not even aware of it. Then the second step of that, I think, is just being with Virgo, like, yeah, how are you implementing your energy for service, right? I mean, I think
Right,
that's some of it.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, really waking up, after having the sun going through your 12th house, where you're just sort of in probably in some sort of unconscious play mode.
Mm.
And then the sun goes into your first house, you're like, oh, I need to be of service. That's who I am with Virgo rising. I need to be of service. And now it's time to make the soup and bring it to the soup kitchen or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Mhm.
It's time to take action on who I really am as a service through my personality. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Because I mean, the first house it's the most powerful house. It's an angular house. So being an angular house, as it's called, it is, yep, you're going to want to take action on it because that's what you're doing in your life.
right.
So applying the service orientated mentality, very important.
Right. And Virgo's whole thing of trying to perfect, it's like
Mm.
perfecting the personality here. It's like the sun is saying, what do you need to do to perfect yourself so that you can be of service? So sit down and make a list. Make a list. What do you need
Yeah.
to do?
And think about what is the highest potential, because that's what we were talking about early on in this
Right.
video, is what's that Virgo can see that highest potential. So what you want to do is see that highest potential and then think about how you want to implement, 'cause
Right.
that's another Virgo keyword. How do you want to implement that potential?
Right.
But keep it simple. You don't want to get too complicated. I'm
No,
thinking
because as
3
soon as you
things, right?
as soon as you get too complicated, you're going to start judging yourself that you're not good enough
Right.
with
So
it being
3
Virgo.
things or less.
3 things or less.
Yeah.
1 or
Yeah.
2 or 3.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, so that's where a big focus is there in that
Mhm.
first house for you with Virgo rising. The other thing, we've got Mars up here in the 10th house. Now, the reason we're talking about Mars here in the middle of Virgo season is that we are preparing for the Mars retrograde, which doesn't happen for a while. Mars will be retrograde from the end of October until the middle of January. Now, the reason we're talking about it so soon is because the entire retrograde is in Gemini. And on September 3rd, Mars enters the shadow of that retrograde. And you want to start thinking very carefully about how you are using your direct energy to move your career forward.
Mhm.
It's kind of simple, isn't it?
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
And I mean, being in Gemini, there's going to be a communication component to it. So
Right.
it's how are you, gathering information, disseminating information. Those are the things you're thinking about with it being in Gemini. How
Right.
you talk to,
Yeah.
whether it's your colleagues that are in your same profession, or whether it's, if you're all the things that might be associated. If you're working on a
Right.
book, it might be how you're talking to the publisher and those pieces, and
Right.
just being careful about
Right.
just noticing if there's frustration or aggravation, just because Mars can sort of create that, but it also can create a great deal of action. So what
Yeah.
you want to do is, the more conscious you are, the more you can make it about positive action instead of annoying frustration that spews out in how you talk to somebody on a bad day, right?
Right. And
Yeah.
with the fact that it's going to go retrograde and it's going to be in its shadow after September 3rd, whatever frustrations you do face around your communication in your career, you're going to have an opportunity to revisit that.
Yep.
Or, you can think of it in either way. If you blast forward and start working on an intellectual project,
Mhm.
it's okay. You're going to revisit it. So
Yeah.
that's all right. I think people don't like retrogrades because they don't like going back to revisit things.
Mhm.
But, that's how we perfect things with Virgo rising.
Yeah.
This is how
Yeah.
we do the work. We don't just throw work against the wall. We have to keep refining it and
You have to
perfecting it and making it better.
Yeah, and you have to gain skills. I mean,
Right.
skills is a important keyword here. So yeah,
Yes.
and that takes,
Yes.
and I unfortunately our society thinks you can get skills like that overnight. You just,
Right.
plug a program into your head and turn into something you're not. But the truth is, it
Right.
takes a lot of work. It takes a
Right.
lot of effort,
Yeah.
and that's what this picture is kind of showing, right? I mean, it
Yes.
just takes a lot of
Absolutely.
that. Third
And
thing?
then, are we ready to move to Virgo here? I mean, Mercury?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So the interesting thing, and the reason we've got Mercury here, is that Mercury goes retrograde during Virgo season. I think on September 9th, Mercury will go retrograde. When it goes retrograde, it is going to be in Libra. Now, Mercury rules both Virgo and Gemini, so it's very tightly connected. This whole period here is so much about communication and how we communicate and what the intention of our communication. We talked about that. Because Mercury is going to start its retrograde in Libra, Mercury in Libra is trying to please others with its voice.
Yeah.
Then it's going to go backwards into Virgo, and it's going to really be questioning whether it's pleasing or whether it's being of service. There's something about that in there as well. Huh.
Yeah, and with the Virgo rising, it's
Wow.
just so important that it's about the service piece. And I mean, you do have a value of relationships. That's what that Libra on the second house cusp is saying, that relationships are tremendous value. But it's just giving you an opportunity to be like, wait a minute, I need to go revisit. Am I doing the service thing I wanted to do? Okay, now I can go back to my relationships, and I'm good. I'm good with myself.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And connecting that with the Mars here, the frustrations maybe because you're trying to please others and not really being true to your own your own path that you know you're supposed to be on. And that could be part of what that Mars retrograde ultimately is about as well.
Yeah.
So pay attention. If you've got Virgo rising, you want to really pay attention to the fact that you're here to be of service. You're not here to please others. That's not the task.
Yeah.
Um,
Certainly not.
Certainly not. Okay.
Yeah.
So there you have it. And I think that wraps it up for Virgo rising.
Great. Okay.
And I'm going to. Okay, now we are ready to move on to Libra rising. And so for those of you with Libra rising, this Virgo season falls in your 12th house. So the sun moves into Virgo and it brings its light and warmth and generosity into your 12th house, which is your unconscious, really.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? When the sun, I would think that those of you with Libra rising, all of a sudden, Virgo season, really, the sun has been moving through the 11th house, through the area of community. You've probably been amongst people, and this really sets you into a quiet time.
Yeah, I think this really gives those of you Libra rising an opportunity to really grapple with that unconscious material, because this is the stuff that's hidden behind the scenes. So your work involves having a greater understanding of what's behind the scenes, and using the intellect of Virgo to kind of make lists and to create some structure around how you're doing that work. So whether that's, hey, I'm just going to go ahead during the season and do that 3-day meditation thing by myself, where I'm renting an Airbnb and I'm just going to go and I'm going to kind of write out a few things about how I'm going to handle the schedule. What food am I going to bring on this solo retreat? What are the nuts and bolts, so that you actually go and do it, because you're really trying to get to this unconscious material that ultimately, if you're not aware of it, it really is the source of some of whatever your suffering is, the things you struggle and suffer from. So this is a time to really grapple with that information. And it's not the easiest to talk about, it's hard to get at, it's hard to access. So
what it makes me think of is thinking about taking that Virgo type of action on your unconscious. Your mind went to a meditation retreat, which is perfect. My mind went to really getting into the nitty gritty of like making a family genogram.
Oh, cool.
Really digging into the details of your family of origin and what that has left in your unconscious, and really, grappling with some of that material in a very specific way.
That's cool. I was thinking the word that came to my mind was the imprint that your genealogy has made on you and your personality, and what information can you gain from that, because it's going to give you an understanding about the sort of the shape of things, where you come from, like what are those deeper layers. So I love that. That's a great idea.
Yeah, good time to get a new therapist, or, not because you're messed up and need a therapist, but someone to help you grapple with some of that inner material. But it's a very, very powerful time when the sun is moving through that house, I think. So the other thing that we want to talk about here is Mars. And the reason we want to talk about Mars right now is because on September 3rd, Mars moves into its shadow for the upcoming Mars retrograde. The retrograde itself doesn't start until the end of October, and it lasts through to the middle of January. But if you start paying attention now, when it enters its shadow, you will be prepared for the retrograde. Mars normally, it moves through a sign, it moves through the houses, relatively quickly. But for this period of time, because of the retrograde, Mars is going to remain in Gemini in your 9th house until March of next year. So this is an area to really pay attention to. The 9th house is it's really our worldview and our understanding of big picture issues. I think of the ninth house as, it embraces things like travel, education, other cultural issues. It also, you can think of it as religion, not spirituality, but religious institutions or even political institutions. So you want to think about how you're using your voice in regards to your worldview. How are you using your voice? And with Mars, there might be an edge, there might be a frustration, and you might be having conversations that you're going to have to revisit during the retrograde. Pay attention to your conversation in that area.
Yeah. I also think, this ninth house, as you mentioned, it has to do with your beliefs. And so I think the most, I'm not sure if it's quite word, but positive frame of the ninth house is really grappling with critical thinking for yourself, like looking at the bigger picture and thinking for yourself, what is going on in the bigger world, what is going on in politics, what is going on with our legal system, let's say. It's really the ability to kind of discern, what is happening. And you may feel frustration about, because Mars is in your ninth house, about those things, politics, the way things are moving, whatever country you're living in. And so now is the time to really think about, okay, well, what do you want to do about it? What kind of impact can you have? How can you use your voice for for upliftment, or to fight the battle that does need to be fought, but in a conscious way, not just because you're angry, but because you're focusing that. And so I'm thinking a little bit about maybe some kind of activism that feels really important to you. But it also means you've got to have that open mind to take on other people's viewpoints. You don't want to just push only your agenda. You've got to think about the bigger picture. So it's a great time to think about how you want to do that, and what is your voice. If you could sort of shout out the things you wanted to say, what would you say? And then can you look at that to see how that's going to actually be useful and positive, instead of just angry.
And understanding that whatever it is, however it starts, once Mars goes into its shadow, you're going to be coming back and revisiting this. So pay attention. Pay attention, and the revisiting of it later on down the line, later in the year, will be a lot easier if you're paying attention now. Otherwise, you can be so unconscious. Mars going through your ninth house, you might just be shouting for the sake of shouting about your worldview without thinking clearly. And the Virgo is really helping you to do some critical thinking with it, with that Mercury in Virgo.
I mean, surely there's enough things to be very upset about in our world right now. So the question about is the right use of force, or the right use of that action energy, rather than just a very destructive use. That's really the question. It's not, because there's nothing wrong with anger itself. It's more like it's an emotion, and it's more about what do you do with it? How do you channel it in a way that is constructive rather than destructive? And that's what we're really looking at with Mars in your ninth house, right? So I was thinking about that.
It's interesting. And then, that brings us to the reason we have Mercury here on this chart, is that Mercury does go retrograde on September 9th. And Mercury rules both Virgo and Gemini. The retrograde itself, so it's super important in this dynamic that's going on. Mercury begins its retrograde in Libra and will back up again into Mercury. So it's going to do a little dance right across that line, really bringing your attention. I'm trying to think that through, how you speak about what you are discovering in your unconscious. There's something in there.
Yeah, I was thinking
Huh.
this is actually quite a profound switch for anyone with Libra rising, because what you're really talking about is the deep unconscious and then the conscious, and having to kind of go,
Right.
hey, I'm gonna, when Mercury starts to go into
Right.
Libra and moves forward, it's sort of like, okay, I'm in the clear, I'm just doing me. And then it's like, hold on, nope. You got to go back and do some of that plumbing of the depths again, because you haven't really effectively understood your priority system, right? And you haven't understood how do you want to be of selfless service. This hard work you're doing around bringing balance is about that selfless service, rather than just trying to sort of please everybody, which is kind
Right.
of the typical
Yes.
one of the pitfalls of the Libra rising is that idea of like, oh geez, I'm just pleasing everybody, when really you've got to understand what
Right.
you need, because
Right.
you're not going to be able to please anybody else anyway. You have to
Right.
work with yourself. So that's
Right.
kind of it, it's kind of a big deal, this Mercury retrograde for Libra rising because of that.
Yeah, because of that, and the fact that that Mercury rules the Mars as it's preparing to do the retrograde, it just brings those two together. The
Yeah.
importance of how you're using your voice.
Mhm.
Are you using your voice just to please others, or are you really going into the depth of your own understanding of what is important and what needs to be important for the greater good?
Yeah, well said.
Ah, beautiful, beautiful.
Nice.
Okay, Libra
Okay.
rising, make it a good one. And now we're going to move on to those of you with Scorpio rising.
Mhm.
This puts Virgo is in your 11th house. So as the sun moves into Virgo and we begin Virgo season, the sun is bringing its light, its warmth, its generosity into the area of your 11th house. 11th house, community, where
Mhm.
you receive from others. The old time astrologers is so funny. The 11th house, they would talk about the 11th house as your hopes and dreams for the future. But really, what it is it's the community of like minded people that supports you to your hopes and dreams for the future.
Mhm.
It's where you receive support and love from others, not
Mhm.
necessarily your best friends, like minded others.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of the focus is this month.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, I mean, sorry, excuse me, Scorpio rising, it just means with Virgo in the 11th house, this is a very inward focus to your community. So it's not a very outwardly expressive place. It's more of an inward place for you. So there's a little bit
Mm,
of, working with that, like, like this contemplative space of like, how do I contribute and receive from my
ah,
community? Like, what is my place in this community? And using your
mm.
mind, it's your mind, because Mercury's there right now. So it's just, how do you apply your mind to be of help to those like-minded souls? Like, how do you work with that kind of back and forth between letting your community support you,
Yeah.
and that lets you see your own potential to then turn around and be part of that whole process.
Yeah,
So
it's like your need to be of service in the world has to be supported by others.
mhm,
You really
yeah.
have to have that support. It's not something you do on your own.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm.
And the Scorpio rising, there's just a depth to the whole focus of your chart. I mean, you're really having to kind of plumb the depths with that. And so this is an important piece. I imagine this is a place that you've got to really satisfy, like you want to be of service of groups, and there's a deep passion to it
Mhm.
because of the Scorpio rising being the
Right.
overarching direction of your life.
That
So,
intense depth, that intense
yeah.
emotional depth of that Scorpio rising. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
because you
And
have Scorpio rising, that Scorpio rising is ruled by Mars. And the reason we've got Mars here showing up on this chart is because we're preparing for Mars to go retrograde. It won't go retrograde until the end of October. It'll stay retrograde until mid-January. The reason we're talking about it now is because on September 3rd, Mars enters its shadow, and everything that goes on from there on until the retrograde will be revisited.
Mhm.
Now, this Mars, the Mars generally doesn't spend very long, a month or two in a sign. Right now, it's going to stay in your 8th house from whenever it went in there very recently until March of next year. So it's a very long haul. You want to get very comfortable with Mars moving through your 8th house. Now, yeah, this is very intense. Right? It's very intense for those of you with Scorpio rising. First of all, because Mars does rule your chart, and then the 8th house is about the deepest levels of how you grapple with other people's values, really deep issues.
Yeah, it's the stuff underneath the surface. It's like when you have that relationship and things are great, and then you kind of meet the 8th house component as a relationship, and what that's astrology speak for is then you start getting into each other's issues. You start finding the kind of vulnerabilities and the wounds and the unresolved baggage that's kind of hanging out, kind of lurking. It's like the iceberg, right? You see the surface, and then you're like, oh, there's a whole bunch more iceberg under the surface. That's what we're talking about in the 8th house. Right. So there's a lot of stuff here about shared values, shared resources, other people's intense emotional stuff. Right. And with Mars going through the 8th house, that's going to be, it's just going to bring stuff up. It just might very well be a very frustrating experience of having to deal with other people's stuff all the time. On the other hand, we can't get anything done without working with each other. We've got to work with each other's stuff. This is how you get to the deeper levels, at the more satisfying levels of relationship. So, there's a real query here. And the main thing for you all with the Scorpio rising is just tuning into how are you talking to other people when you're feeling frustrated with them, what's coming up, and then I don't know, creating some space, like a little bit of a container for yourself around that, because if you start feeling frustrated, it's kind of like you need a little cue, like, okay, remember to take, I think my mother used to say to me, count to 10, but it works, because it gives you just a moment before you start to react. So that's kind of what you're going to want to be thinking about, because you've got a long time to work with this material. If you're aware of it now, you can start just being aware of it, how you're speaking to other people in these difficult situations.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is just paying attention. Where are you really bumping into frustration about other people's baggage? And that can mean so many things. The old time astrologers, which I always say, but they would talk about that 8th house as sex, death, and taxes. It's where we bump into things that people are very attached to their own opinions of, their own beliefs of, and where we have to grapple with that. Now, Gemini, I think, one really good way to work with this is just get curious. Get curious about why they think the way they do, what is in that iceberg under there, what's in there. Get curious and start digging in there with them if you can. And the other thing that Jennie really taught me about the 8th house is that it's so important and so valuable to work with ritual in this area. So, if you can create rituals that can, if you're really in this grappling with someone really close to you, developing rituals to work with together, maybe. But this is a really intense period for you. And when I say intense, I hope you don't take it as, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. No, it's going to be rich. It might be horrible if you don't pay attention and just blast forward and, use a loud, angry voice when you come upon somebody else's baggage that you don't understand. If you're unconscious, that might be exactly how it plays out, and it might be horrible. But if you pay attention and work with it, it can be so rich and powerful, and it can change your relationships in very profound ways.
Yeah, I think that's great, Laurie, because I all while you're talking, I was thinking too that Gemini's conversation. There's two parts to Gemini. So there's a talker and a listener, and you can be on either end of that.
Beautiful.
So it's the conversation. So
beautiful.
thank you for all that. That's great.
Okay, so now think about Mercury over there. The reason Mercury's there is because Mercury goes retrograde on September 9th. What do you want to say about that, Jenny?
Well, it's kind of an interesting one because it's going to move into Libra, and then once it hit 8 degrees, it's going to backtrack into Virgo. So for those of you with Scorpio rising, that means it's going to move forwards into your 12th house, which is the sort of the hidden house, or the house of being alone, or the house of what's behind the scenes, or there's a few different ways to look at it. But basically it's going to move into that kind of isolated place. And then it's going to go, wait a minute, what are my priorities again? Like, I need to be of service to my community. So I'm going to go back and revisit that and get clear about what my values are. And then once it moves back into that 12th house, that like more tucked away unconscious place, I will know that the purpose for that your journey in that unconscious place is to be of service to other people. So as you navigate that 12th house, we talk a lot about it being a place where all humans suffer. But the point of suffering is that you develop compassion for everyone else, because you realize that we all share this experience of suffering. So that is kind of what that territory is. So all this to say, like, Scorpio, like, this is going to be an intense, internal focused little bit of time for you. But that's, but you got this. You're Scorpio. I mean, you have the ability to go into these subterranean places, and that's part of the beauty of your focus with Scorpio rising. So
no, just that whole journey of Mercury in its retrograde, because Mercury rules both Virgo and Gemini, these are so connected. This grappling with other people's deep issues and learning to understand that, and learning to go into your own depths. There's such a connection there. And really, that whole issue of suffering for the development of compassion is so important. And I think that's such an important issue for Scorpio. Anyway.
There's like a redemption to it, right? It's like a redemptive kind of like, so I don't know. I think this could be a very fruitful inward time for those.
I think so too.
Like a transformative time that sets the stage for you to be a profound resource to other people around you, because times are rocky. So this is a useful little bit of a retreat time.
Beautiful.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Scorpio risings. And now we will move on to those of you who have Sagittarius rising. We have the Virgo season. The sun, as it enters Virgo, it brings its warmth and generosity and light into your 10th house. So the Virgo season focuses the attention on your career. Okay. It's time to get back to work. It's time to pay attention and make those lists of what you need to do to become who you need to be of service through your career. Yeah.
Love that. It's kind of straightforward in a way.
Kind of straightforward in a way.
Yeah. Really. So, I mean, this is a time, if you have a profession or a career that's been a calling to you, this is a time to revisit, and what are your priorities? Like how are you being of service? Not everybody has a career profession. So this is also your social reputation, just how you show up in general, in public. So nonetheless, still the same question, how are you being of service? And how are you utilizing your potential to make an impact?
That's so much, that whole issue of potential. And Virgo has such a reputation about the critical nature of Virgo and picky and all that. But the thing to pay attention to with Virgo in your 10th house is, are you being self-critical of your career? Are you beating yourself up because you haven't reached the potential that you see for yourself in career? Well, really the antidote to that is to just be of service. make a pot of soup. I don't know,
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
something here to give back through your career, vocation, or social reputation, how
Yeah.
people see you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the meantime, right?
In the meantime, we've got Mars
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
here that we want to talk about. And the reason we're talking about Mars in the middle of Virgo season is that we are preparing for the upcoming retrograde of Mars. It does not actually go retrograde until the end of October, but on September 3rd, it enters its shadow. So we want to start thinking about it. Mars normally goes through the signs pretty quickly, but because of the retrograde, it is going to remain in Gemini until March of next year. This is a long time for Mars to hang out in one area. And for you with Sagittarius rising, Mars is hanging out in the seventh house of intimate partners. Those one-on-one kind of equal relationships that you count on in your life.
Mhm.
How's this going to show up? And what do we need to think about?
Again, this is fairly simple. This is be careful how you talk to your partner.
Right.
Look at any frustration that you may have in your relationships and notice how you're talking to that, those one-on-one relationships in your life. In a marriage, this is something that's, you really want to tune into. It's easy to get, if you are in a marriage and you've been in one for a while, it's a little bit easy to get kind of unconscious in those places because it's familiar. So this is a really important time to go, geez, wait a minute, how am I doing how I want to do it? Am I speaking the way I want to speak? Am I listening? Am I listening to my
Right.
partner? And am I taking on board the whole conversation that our relationship is based on? So it's kind of just that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. And the
pretty simple.
conversations and the frustrations around the conversations that occur starting in early September will be revisited during the retrograde.
Mhm.
So, keep that in mind. And that's why, if you really are paying attention, it'll make the retrograde period so much easier.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because the retrograde can be difficult if we're unconscious of where it's happening. If we're
Yeah.
really paying attention, we can get a lot of work done here. The other
Mhm.
thing with Gemini, with Mars being in Gemini, if you find yourself really feeling frustrated in conversations with your partner or your very best friend, whoever it is that's playing that role, it could be a business partnership also. Especially with the focus up here on your career,
Mhm.
this could well be a
Mhm.
business partnership as well.
Mhm.
Get curious about what it is that's bothering you,
Yeah.
because it's Mars is going through that house. Maybe your best bet is to take your partner and go mountain biking, do something really
Mhm.
physical to move energy. Get curious about your sexual relationship with your partner, also with it being Mars.
Mhm.
Change things up, do things different, use
Yeah.
that energy.
I love
But
that you
pay
brought up mountain
attention.
biking.
I knew
I'm
you'd
like,
like that.
Laurie brought up mountain biking. Yay, it wasn't me. Yeah, no, I love all those things that you said. And I just think, because the end result here is when you do those things, then you can like really take action for your partnership. It can be something that, where you've got each other's back. It's like more of a team thing, which can be a lot
Right.
if you're depending what you're going through in life. But that's what you're working with. So when you can harness that energy, that's where
Right.
you can get it to,
Right.
right? So,
So if you're paying
uh-huh.
attention to it now and you come back to revisit it in the fall, you've got something to work with that can uplift and help the relationship rather than being a problem. If you're totally unconscious and you're just, saying rude things because Mars is going
Mars
through
is
there,
rude.
Mars can be rude. If you're paying attention, you've got something to work with to improve things. And that brings us to, why do we have Mercury here? Well, Mercury is going to go retrograde on September 9th. Mercury rules both Virgo and Gemini. So it's tied into both of these pieces very closely. When it goes retrograde, it's going to start its retrograde in Libra, and it's going to go back into Virgo here.
Yeah.
So what do we need to be rethinking?
Well, I mean, I think you're with Mercury going into Libra, it's going to start bringing your attention into your groups and into your community. And so it's going to kind of move along there, and then it's going to stop and retrograde back into Virgo. So it's going to be a little bit like, hold on, I need to go and make sure I'm in the right place with my career or my social reputation. And then it will go back to, once you've adjusted that priority, it'll go back to the 11th house, and then you'll be kind of in your groups, ideally with your priorities in the right place of thinking about your service piece, rather than, oh, I'm just going to please my community, you know, just by doing these things. Like, nope, you've got the priority set to service, not pleasing.
Yeah, I mean, that just as you're talking about that, and I'm thinking about the Mars and the personal relationships, I'm thinking about the kinds of conversations that could be coming up in that regard. It's interesting because your partner very well might be the one that's pointing out to you, and you might not like it, how you may be, you know, trying to please others rather than doing your work.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's good. All right.
That's interesting time for you, Sagittarius rising. Enjoy and pay attention. Okay, now for those of you with Capricorn rising, Virgo season highlights the 9th house as the sun moves into Virgo. It brings its light, its warmth, its generosity into that 9th house. The 9th house being your worldview, how you really expand your understanding of the world. What else does the 9th house have to do with, Jennie?
Well, this is interesting because it has a lot to do with your perspective and I think critical thinking. So it's kind of it's a pretty mental space anyway. And here you with Capricorn rising, you've got Virgo here. So this is a chance to really think about how your open-mindedness is such a service. Because that's the thing, you know, like as you can embrace other people and their different ways of doing things and be open to that, you're just, that is an enormous service, because it's hard for people to be open-minded, and a lot of people aren't and can't take on other people's viewpoints. So it's something about using this time to kind of, you know, have a greater understanding of yourself in this area of life, and then how it's going to impact other people.
It's interesting, you know, Virgo being, we talked about Virgo a lot at the beginning of the video, but Virgo, the reputation of it being so critical, and the need to understand the potential, and to reach the potential requires being of service. So, you know, if, as Jennie's talking about open-mindedness, if you think, oh, you know, I have to face reality in myself, and I'm not open-minded at all, and I'm so critical, you know, I mean, that Virgo self-criticism, you know, being of service in some way is what's required, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it. That is a big part of it. It's a
Yeah.
very active, it's like getting out there and engaging with people that you maybe don't understand their viewpoint. I mean, it's like rubbing elbows with them, because Virgo's so practical. I mean, it's the earth sign. It's very much like, all right, well, let's go do something together. And that is how you learn, you know, you learn these other people's perspectives. So
yeah,
which kind of brings in, I mean, in a way, it brings in the other piece here, which is where Mars is located in the chart.
So Mars, we're talking about Mars now because Mars, on September 3rd, Mars enters its shadow period before its retrograde. Now, the retrograde doesn't actually happen until the end of October. Mars will stay retrograde until the middle of January. So it seems like it's a ways off, but when it enters its shadow, we want to really start paying attention to it. And in the 6th house, you want to really think about how you are using your body and your mind in your day-to-day routines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I was thinking that, with Capricorn rising, I mean, Capricorn can be, it can be stodgy and stuck, to some degree. And I think that in the sixth house, like with Mars in sixth house, it's like spice up your routines. Like take a look at your kind of daily routines that you do, your exercise, how you eat,
Yeah.
and like think about mixing it up, changing some things, like maybe doing something more active in one area.
Right.
Maybe incorporating some chili peppers into your your diet. I mean, it's a little bit of like spice it up, make it more
Spice it up.
diverse,
Yeah.
bring in a little more, use your intellect. Mars is in Gemini, to think a little bit
Right.
outside the box, to introduce new components to what you're doing on the daily.
I
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that.
yeah,
I
try
like
something.
that. I
Yeah,
like thinking about that as, with Capricorn
yeah,
rising, you might just be frustrated and aggravated with your particular routines.
yeah,
And yeah, you need to change them
yeah.
because that frustration is going to really become a problem and could really manifest through the retrograde as physical issues.
Yeah.
But if you pay
Uh-huh.
attention and spice them up, put those chili peppers in your food. I just love that idea. But somehow spicing up those routines will
Yeah.
really help support
Mhm.
your physicality through the retrograde.
Yeah. I was thinking too, that it brought to mind, like, maybe you're somebody who's done solitary exercise. Well, maybe it's time to play squash with a competitor and somebody you can talk with, somebody who is intellectually
Oh, yeah.
your equal. And so you can have a
Yeah.
banter and you can have a little, or maybe it's tennis or something like that, or chess. I mean, those are all
Right.
things that would be a great use of this energy and help you, I don't know, create a new relationship with somebody different than you that would help open your mind, which brings you back to that ninth house.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then coming back to the Gemini, just getting curious about how you could do that different.
Yeah.
Like you said, bring the intellect in, bring the curiosity in. What can I do different with my day-to-day routines, how I take care of my health care, exercise, all of those things? You can always get a new kitten. Sorry.
Yeah. So Laurie's projecting, but
a kitten will change your
yeah.
day-to-day routines. It will spice it up, believe me.
Yeah. And then what else? We have the last part, which brings us to Mercury. Is going to retrograde. We have Mercury as the ruler of Virgo and Gemini. So Mercury's an important player here. But basically what's going to happen on, I believe it is
The
September
9th.
9th. Mercury is going to be in Libra and it's going to start heading back to Virgo. It's going to retrograde. So this means that whole intellectual planet is going to move into your career and your vocational space. And then it's going to backtrack and be like, wait a minute, what are your priorities? You need to kind of make sure that you're directing it this more service-oriented priority. So that's what you're going to have the opportunity to do, to kind of go back, revisit that expansive worldview you have, just kind of tweak the priorities a little bit, and then it will move back into your 10th house of your career.
It's like, oh, I'm not quite paying attention properly. I have to go back and think about it. I'm so busy trying to please others. I'm forgetting my priorities. So I've got to go back and rethink that. So that's part of that. Yeah. What that Mercury retrograde is going to be showing you. And it connects totally with bringing your attention into your routines as well. Okay.
Great.
Anything else?
No, I think
all right.
I think that's it.
Capricorn rising, have a good month. And we're going to move now to those of you with Aquarius rising. For those of you with Aquarius rising, Virgo, when the sun moves into Virgo, it is bringing its light, its warmth, its generosity, all of that shininess of the sun is going to enter your 8th house. The 8th house is a very, very, very deep house. So here we settle in a serious, practical way into really considering the values of others, deep, intense issues that we encounter when we're in relationship with other people, because it's not always easy to be in relationship with other people.
Oh, this is a lot about the eighth house is so much about shared resources.
Yeah.
Just not just like, oh, these other people have these other resources. It's how do you have a relationship with them so that you can work together to use each other's resources, which means having to kind of, deal with your own ego and attachments to what you think is most valuable, and listening to what the other people's things are that they think is most valuable, and finding a way to find common ground. And that is difficult work. And it's,
Right.
on the bigger scale, it's the work of real democracy, what it really would be. And it takes so much work and effort to achieve that. So there's a lot here. There's a lot of having to, kind of understand yourself, and, especially
Yeah.
with that Virgo being here ruled by Mercury. So it's a lot about your own, like, your headspace, your own mental capacity is going to help you tease this apart. Understand yourself, where you end, where the other person comes in. So it's a lot about that stuff. It's
Right.
a grappling ground for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a place where we grapple with the deeper meaning of being in relationship with other people. I really liked it when we were talking a little while ago with one of the rising signs, how you talked about the eighth house, as you see the top of the iceberg. But underneath that, there is so much. And with the sun moving in there, it's time to really kind of go in and grapple with not just what's above the surface, but what's really in the weeds and below the surface. And
Yeah.
you've talked a lot over time, Jenny, about the importance and the usefulness of ritual with the eighth house, and really working with ritual to understand how to do that grappling when it gets hard, because it's not easy to go there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think those of you with Aquarius rising, I mean, this is an air sign that's kind of, at that forefront. So your whole direction is about innovation and inventing and doing new things. And this, in a way, like, you're fairly well equipped. I mean, depending what the condition is of your own natal Mercury, but anyway, you're fairly well equipped because this eighth house is an intellectual space. So, and you're naturally attuned to an intellectual space with Aquarius rising. So gives you a little more, I dare say, ability to step back and kind of go, what needs to happen here? Because those eighth house issues, part of the problem is they're hard to talk about because they're partly unconscious. So people don't even have the language to describe what they may want to describe. And that's part of the reason it's so hard. But for you, you have this this ability perhaps to talk about these things in a way that's a little more
Objective.
clear. Yeah, objective. Great word. Yep.
Yeah. Huh.
Good.
Interesting. Okay. So the next thing we want to think about is Mars down here. And the reason we've brought Mars in during Virgo season is that on September 3rd, Mars enters the shadow of its upcoming retrograde. The retrograde doesn't actually happen until late October. It'll stay retrograde till middle of January. During that time, this whole period of time, actually, between now and March of next year, Mars is going to be in your fifth house. So this is what we need to start thinking about. If you start really paying attention, you will make the upcoming Mars retrograde so much easier for yourself. Mars retrograde can be a difficult time because for most of us, it just kind of hits and we're not ready for it. So if you start thinking about it and planning for it now, it'll be so much easier. Now, Mars moving through the fifth house is where we give of ourselves, where we give love, where we give our creative expression is in that house. So you want to really think about how you're taking action to give of yourself, how you're talking to the people you're showing love to, how your voice is showing up in your creativity. That's what you want to really be thinking about.
And I dare say with Mars moving through your fifth house too, it might really bring forward the risk-taking component of the fifth
Oh,
house.
yes.
And so on one hand, because Mars
Yes.
is kind of the daredevil. So on one hand, that's great. Like we all need to take risks. We need to take risks in how we love people. We need to take risks
Right.
in how we choose to express ourselves creatively. And so I think that the key piece here is to bring conscious awareness to that, because obviously if you take too much risk, if you put everything on the line, things could go wrong. So this is a time to like think about what
Pay
kinds of risks do
attention.
you want to take. Yeah, and just paying attention, so
Ah,
you're not thrusting yourself headlong into something kind of maybe kind of dumb that you haven't really had a chance to be like, wait, how am I feeling about this? So but if you have, because that's what we're sort of saying to you, and you think about that, then you can maybe just employ that sort of risk-taking endeavor into something a little more worthwhile, but really folding it into how you give love to other people, would be the highest
right,
use of that.
right.
So just something really to tune into.
Yeah,
I mean,
really.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah, tuning
That's-
into
mhm.
how that energy is working in your creativity or in how you give of yourself. Thinking about that, paying attention to that. That's really all you need to do right now is pay attention to it.
Yeah.
You will have the opportunity later in the year to revisit it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if you're paying attention to it now, when you revisit it, it'll work so much
Yeah.
better.
So this is a time to be brave, but not reckless. That's kind of what we're trying to,
Exactly. That's beautiful.
especially, yeah, it's like
Be brave in how you give of yourself, whether that's,
completely.
with Gemini there, whether that's, creative speaking,
Mhm.
creative, yeah,
Yeah,
it's how
public
you give
speaking.
of yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
could totally be that. Cool.
So then the next piece is this Mercury up here. And the reason we've got Mercury here also is Mercury goes retrograde on the 9th of September. And it will be in Libra when it does its retrograde. So Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo. So it's very tied into this whole little pattern that's going on. Um, we're going to be moving forward. Mercury is going to move into Libra and then it's going to hit a wall and have to come back. It's like, okay, when Mercury moves into Libra, it's like, I'm going to please everybody with my voice. And then it's going to stop and go back and go, well, I need to think. I need to think more about this. I need to get a little more serious. I need to think about how I am serving my relationships, how I'm serving myself here before it can move forward again.
Yeah, makes sense. Yep, kind of highlights that area again. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
nice.
So those are really the areas to pay attention to during Virgo season. And we will be doing a video specifically about the Mars retrograde at some point. And other than that, make sure you listen to us when we get to Libra season. Okay.
Great. Okay.
And now we're going to move on to those of you with Pisces rising.
Hmm.
With Pisces rising, Virgo holds court in your seventh house. So when the sun moves into Virgo, it brings its light, its generosity, its warmth into the seventh house, which is intimate partnerships, you know,
Mm.
spousal romantic relationships on the one hand, but it's also business relationships, any really highly significant one-on-one partnership type relationships is what the seventh house is about.
Hmm.
With Virgo there, you really, you want to think about how you're of service to your partner. That's really going to be highlighted at this
Yeah.
time.
And some of those ways might be
Mm,
very practical, right? We're talking about
yeah.
that whole, making the lists of things that you need to do, like organizing your life. So part of your skill and your partnership may be how you kind of organize your lives together. Yeah.
Right. You want
Hmm.
to also pay attention to, you know, pay attention to issues of criticizing, because with Virgo there, you can fall into those traps of
Yeah.
criticism
Hmm.
in relationship. And
Hmm.
yeah, having expectations that aren't practical.
Yeah. Oh, you're reminding me. We've talked a little bit about Virgo being potential. So there's a very
Yeah.
fine line between potential and seeing the potential, and then having, expectations that are too much. There's a very
Right.
fine line, sort of believing in your partner and kind of seeing their potential, but not expecting them to be operating at, top notch performance all the time, at the best of their potential. I think that where the criticism could kind of come in here.
Right. And I think
Yeah.
that is something that so many of us fall into this trap of falling in love with someone's potential,
Right. Yeah.
and
Mhm.
where does that get us? It
Mhm.
gets us in divorce court eventually.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because
pretty much.
we can't fall in love with someone's potential. We have to fall in love with someone
Yeah.
right where they stand
Mhm.
today.
Yeah.
And I think,
Ain't that the
with
truth?
Virgo on that line, it's just really important to really look at that practical level of who am I in relationship with? How am I bringing light and warmth of acceptance to that relationship right
Mhm.
now today?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. Okay.
Now let's talk about Mars down here.
Let's
The
do it.
reason Mars is showing up here on this chart, the reason we're talking about it is because on September 3rd, Mars is going to enter the shadow of its upcoming retrograde. Now, Mars retrograde can be kind of a tough thing, and it lasts quite a while. Mars will go retrograde at the end of October. It will stay retrograde until the middle of January. During that time, we are going to be really, for you with Pisces rising, the focus of that Mars retrograde is going to be in your home, your family, the core of you. I think of that fourth house even as the maternal ancestral line.
Mm,
There's an
I like
almost
that.
unconscious level here in the fourth house. But
Mhm.
when Mars moves in there, what you want to be really paying attention to how, because it's in Gemini, how you're using your voice with your family, about your home. What's your conversation there?
Mhm.
Because you're going to be revisiting that later in the year.
Mhm.
So be aware of how you're talking to your children, how you're talking to your spouse, how you're talking to your family members. You're
Mhm.
going to be revisiting that. I don't
Yeah.
think, I think the biggest problem with any retrograde is it's really gets complicated if we don't know it's coming because we're not ready for it and we're revisiting something we didn't know we were going to have to revisit.
Yeah.
We had these
Mhm.
mean conversations with our family members. We didn't know that we were going to have to revisit that later.
Yeah.
So really
Mhm.
paying attention.
And that fourth house is really really is the most private part of your whole chart. So to have Mars in this very private part, I mean that it may not show, outwardly as much, or may feel more like a I don't know, I was thinking like a hot spot,
Uh-huh.
because it's kind of like this, it's just something to pay attention to. There may be some, if it's manifesting in sort of a more irritating way, it's something to tune into because it's just trying to let you know it's there because it's something you maybe need to look at, or some conversation you need to have, or something you were talking about earlier is like gathering information about your lineage. And it
Mm.
may be that you need to take action to have a greater understanding of something to do with your lineage because
Mm.
it's playing out in your family life now. So that would be, I mean, those are
Right.
all
Oh,
these
that's
kind of,
good.
yeah, well, you made me think of it, something you said earlier. So, but I think that that's something to tune into with this being there. So to
Getting
take the time.
curious
Hmm.
about family stories
Yo, yeah, that's a great way
and
to think about
taking
it. Hmm.
action on getting serious about family stories. That would be a great way to think about it. You could discover old family stories and then later in the year, bringing them forth into your family.
Yeah,
Something, yeah, that could be really a creative time.
yeah,
I
yeah.
I think if we use these retrogrades properly, they can be very, very helpful in moving us forward.
Yeah, because this
Um,
is a very inward season, so
yeah,
this is an opportunity to kind of set those things in motion. But
yeah. Absolutely. So the next thing we want to just mention is the fact that Mercury is also going retrograde on September 9th. Mercury goes retrograde. It will be in Libra when it retrogrades.
Mm-hmm.
Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo. So it's very connected to both parts of this conversation. The retrograde itself is going to, Mercury, our thought processes, how we think, how we communicate. Mercury is going to move into that 8th house. We're going to start grappling with these deep topics, and then we're going to hit a wall and have to come back into Virgo. So, there's something in that about thinking, well, maybe I can just please them,
and not really do the work.
However,
no, it's not
the
going to work.
retrograde brings us back to actually doing the work.
Yeah, because it's, brings you back to reminding yourself of your priorities in your relationship. And part of your priorities has to do with being in service with your partnership. Like, that's what you do with each other. I mean, it should be a two-way street where there's a balance there. I recognize that those words could be misconstrued, like to be in service to one's partnership, but really it's more of a service-oriented mindset, so that you're for the higher good, for the purpose of moving things along into a meaningful way. And then once you've sort of re-equipped yourself with that clear priority, going back into that 8th house, where you can work with, if it's your partner's baggage or other people's baggage, in a way that you're not just trying to please them. You're going to bring a nice, equity type of mindset to it. With Libra there, you're going to be trying to do more balance work, rather than trying to upset the status quo. But also the problem with Libra is you try to shy away from having the hard conversations, and this will give you an opportunity to kind of get yourself prepared to have those more difficult conversations you may need to have. So
it's interesting. One of the things that I was thinking of as you're talking about that, I was thinking about you said something about how easy it would be to misconstrue that. And, you don't want people thinking, well, I'm supposed to be in service to my partner. But there's also another way to look at that or think about that, is the partnership itself may be of service. So kind of putting that little spin on it as well. How does the partnership allow me to be of service in a bigger way? I don't know, there's something there.
Or how does the partnership help each individual in the partnership meet their potential? So you create the stability, this nice practical grounded stability between the two of you. And then it allows each of you to kind of live in a way. I mean, that's a good partnership, right? Allows you each to access your potential.
Right. And this conversation is actually great for anyone with Pisces rising, because analyzing your relationship is something you probably do a lot of. With Virgo on that line of the 7th house, analyzing your relationship during Virgo season is very applicable, very appropriate.
Just do it kindly.
Just do it kindly. Absolutely. Do it kindly. Remember that kindness component of Virgo. All right.
Okay. Great.
I think we are done with that, and let's stop sharing and just say, if anyone is still with us watching and listening, thank you all so much.
Make some comments if you have any.
Yes, please do. All right.
You.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Laurie.